how has your perspective on social change been influenced by your now nearly 10 years in government?
There's different chapters in your life. So for me, I couldn't have done this in my 20s, 30s, or 40s because government moves really slowly. The scale that it changes lives in is pretty awesome. The pace, the frustrations, the buzzsaw of bureaucracy at every turn. I mean, there's just things that like I wouldn't have had patience for as a young, eager, radical part of the movements of the 60s and 70s. So I still believe social movements are what make history, but I think my generation, way underestimated and undervalued electoral politics. So I think the corrective for me over time has been, and really it's been by watching Jackie Goldberg, Antonio Villaraigosa, Sheila Kuehl. It's been watching social movement people, Karen Bass, who then went into electoral politics, that showed how inside-outside worked. And by the way, every single one of those progressive electoral leaders, I mean real leaders, not only came out of social movements, but they're Liberty Hill people. They were institutionally Liberty Hill people. They sat on the community funding board. They sat on the board of directors. They sat on the advisory board. They were longtime donors. You couldn't count on two hands how many times they've come to Liberty Hill dinner. And that's not a coincidence that Liberty Hill would be the political space that those conversations would happen.
So it's not a coincidence what's been our role in manufacturing that?
No, and I think that is one of Liberty Hill's key roles, to be at the cutting edge of anything that has to do with social justice in Los Angeles. Anything, any issue. I was thinking the other day, I was remembering the first time I ever heard of Liberty Hill Foundation. I'm sure I'm going to get the year wrong, but it was something like 1978. When I moved to California to run Holly Near's record company, the middle of lesbian, feminist, countercultural sort of upsurge of women's music and culture, Holly Near was flying down to do a fundraiser for Liberty Hill Foundation, which I had never heard of course. It's a West Coast thing. I was coming from Chicago. And it was a fundraiser that she'd been asked to do because Liberty Hill had funded a lesbian film called In the Best Interests of the Children. That nobody else funded lesbian movies in 1978. It was always on the cutting edge.
So how do you think Liberty Hill contributed to creating that backdrop for the movements that have come since then?
I think Liberty Hill's kind of consistent through-line contribution has been recognizing that the people who are affected by the problems are the ones who have the answers. It's been investing in community organizing, community organizing, community organizing. I mean, there was nobody in philanthropy investing in community organizing when Liberty Hill started doing it. There was nobody talking about it in philanthropy. So Liberty Hill has sort of this, I don't know, it's kind of like ethical or values that have driven it, which is the people affected by the problems are the ones who have to be part of the solution. Community organizing is as important as advocacy. Advocacy is, professionals, lawyers or whatever, advocating on behalf of people who are affected by inequity. Community organizing is people affected by inequity themselves being organized. That is a really big difference, and it's one that people in progressive movement often have not taken seriously.
So you said when you took over Liberty Hill, the issues we were working on at the time were tenants' rights, criminal justice, police reform, the same issues we're grappling with now. What would you say has and hasn't changed since then on those issues?
The right wing in America controls the Congress, controls the Supreme Court, and kind of controls the discourse, and has for the last 25 years. So the only movement that has succeeded wildly in the face of the American right coming into more political power than it's ever had in history, it's always been there, but it's never had more political power than it does today, has been the LGBT movement, because it's detached from economics. So it was able to build a movement, particularly around marriage equality, particularly in the wake of AIDS, in the wake of HIV/AIDS and the decimation of 50% of the urban gay male population. I mean, so in a weird way, and I say this and people go like, what? In a weird way, marriage equality is to AIDS what Israel was to the Holocaust. It was an inevitable moral, no matter what you think of Israel, it was a necessary, affirmation of life. There was no stopping a movement. After so many people died, the right wing fought it like crazy, and they had to crumble. They had to crumble. And but it's really, really interesting that the right wing comes to power in America at the same time as the LGBT movement comes into. But if AIDS hadn't happened, that wouldn't have happened. I mean, that's the weird irony of that. Okay, so just set that aside, because the progress of LGBT rights is radically different than any other civil rights or human rights movement in America. The rest, it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes it's 2 steps backward. We have economic instability, insecurity, inequity worse in 100 years in this country. It is so bad. We have climate change. And we still have, so to me, those are the 2 big issues of the day, is economic inequality and climate change. And, both of them, you have one political party that pretends that it doesn't exist, that wipes out those conversations. And I know we're nonpartisan, and I know this is a 501c3, so I have to be careful what I say, but I don't work here. But yeah, you can't look at the miracles that Liberty Hill has wrought without being just honest about the context. I mean, that's pretty incredible. So it's sort of over the sweep of 40 years, there's some things that are very constant with Liberty Hill.
Sometimes when we talk about the 40th anniversary, it sort of creates this reflection that we've done all of these great things, but really what good has it done, given how much power the right has and still has in preventing these things from coming to full fruition?
First of all, a lot has changed. In my lifetime, a lot has changed. For my life, for your life, to be able to be lived as freely, as open lesbians, this is huge. This is a huge victory for human rights, right? It's like, don't underestimate what has changed just because we're still fighting. After Prop 8 passed, there was a radical shift on marriage equality in a very short period of time. I mean, it was like months where it went 15 points or something. I don't remember exactly. And so you do the work, and it's not a linear thing. Like this year this will happen, and then next year it's not formulaic. Like this input and that output. What does John D'Amelio, the gay historian, calls it? Alternating cycles of leaping and creeping. So you have these moments that are like movement moments, like after Prop 8, when everybody hit the streets and suddenly marriage equality, and everybody's like, you're either for us or you're against us, and people are all choosing, and there's these movement moments. But the way he put it was, and then you have these creeping moments where not much seems to change. And then, but what he says is that how high you leap depends on how well you creep. How well you build the infrastructure, do that slow, behind-the-scenes, not very sexy work of bringing people together, building relationships, advancing the ideas, testing out some things. Ultimately, it's about relationships. That's what I believe. And that's what Liberty Hill does.
When I look at Prop 47 and Black Lives Matter and the civilian oversight, all this stuff that's happening around criminal justice and police reform, it seems to me that it is led by the same groups that you all funded back then. It's informed by the same analysis that you all developed back then. And that really we are now seeing the success of the early investment you made.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Good. That goes to my point that it's a long-term investment and patient capital, right? Yeah. It would have been great if things had happened sooner, but they didn't. But the sustained effort definitely was boosted.
From your experience, what are the top 3 lessons that you've learned that you think younger organizers coming up now should know?
I think people should heed Stuart Quo's words that this might be a 100-year cycle and not instant. It's like it's supposed to happen like that, and it doesn't. So maybe a more elegant way to put that is that social justice time is not regular time. The relationships that you build now are maybe ones that will sustain you or that will help you in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. That's really the magic of Liberty Hill, is if you go to that dinner, you see some of the same people that you saw, and you see some new people every year, which is great, but you see some of the same people that you saw there 30, 40 years ago. Good social justice organizations have a kind of a soul or a life force, you know, and the DNA of Liberty Hill. I mean, the leadership changes, the players change a little bit, the issues, you know, may change a little bit, but there's something that's absolutely kind of permanent, ongoing, sustainable. Those values: invest in the people on the ground, value community organizing along with advocacy, bring people together across race, class, you know, all kinds of divides, because we're also going to meet each other.
You are speaking of a time when I came to know Liberty Hill. I came to know Liberty Hill 20 years ago when you were taking over. And everything you say about the time, about the analysis, about what matters, I just know that deep inside me, and I feel like I got that from being an Angelino in Liberty Hills, Los Angeles. This idea that the people impacted by the problems should be the ones leading the fight. I mean, that's deeply ingrained in me. I mean, in so many ways, I think I'm a product of Liberty Hill, really.
Liberty Hills, Los Angeles. I like that.